The construction worker took me to bed. It started with a renovation. A quiet house in the suburbs, old wooden floors, walls that needed new paint. And me, a buttoned-up lawyer trying to make something finally feel like home. I wasn't looking for anything more than new tiles and functional plumbing, but then he showed up. Mason, the man who walked in with dusty boots, a deep voice, and arms carved by labor. I told myself it was just admiration, just curiosity, just harmless glances at his back while he worked, until the day he looked back and didn't look away. This isn't just about home improvement. It's about unraveling, about being touched in places I didn't know were starved. Not just my skin, but the walls I had built around myself, and the man who broke through them without even trying. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss a single beat of this slow burn that turns into a fire. Because when the construction worker took me to bed, I realized he was rebuilding more than just my house. He was rebuilding me. The first time I saw him, he was standing in my entryway, holding a toolbox in one hand and peeling off his work gloves with the other. I'd been expecting someone older, maybe balding, with a stained shirt and too much attitude. That's what most contractors had been like so far. But this guy was not that. He wore a black t-shirt tight around his arms, jeans dusty and ripped at the knees, and his skin had that sun-kissed, slightly weathered tone that made you wonder if he ever stopped working outdoors. His hair was messy in a perfect way, dark brown with flecks of sawdust, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were a steel gray that made my pulse skip, just for a second. "Mason," he said, offering his hand. "I'm here to check the foundation and start on the bathroom demolition." His grip was firm, rough but warm. I was painfully aware that I probably looked like a stiff, nervous attorney, which, in fairness, I was. My slacks felt too clean, my dress shirt too formal for this interaction. I was off that day, but I hadn't changed out of habit, always on guard, always keeping the mask on. "I'm Daniel," I replied. "Thanks for coming. The other guy bailed last minute." Mason shrugged. "Happens. People hate doing older homes. But I like them. They have stories under the floorboards." I laughed lightly. "That's poetic for a contractor." He smirked, then set his toolbox down and knelt to inspect a crack near the baseboard. I stood awkwardly behind him, arms crossed, trying not to stare at the way his shirt lifted just enough to show the small of his back. I told myself it was nothing, just appreciation, a casual glance. Right. He stayed focused, moving through the house with confidence, tapping, measuring, checking beams, making notes with a stubby pencil behind his ear. Every so often he'd glance back at me and say something like, "This corner's settling unevenly," or, "You've got moisture buildup behind this wall." I nodded and pretended to understand, but every word that came out of his mouth sounded like gravel and honey. At one point he stood behind me to look out the back window, shoulder almost touching mine. I didn't move, neither did he. We stood there in silence, the air suddenly too heavy for comfort. "You live here alone?" he asked, casually. "Yeah." "No roommates?" "Nope." He nodded slowly, then stepped away. Nothing about his tone was suggestive, but everything in his voice lingered. Over the next week, Mason came back daily. The project was bigger than expected. Plumbing reroutes, wall reinforcements, subfloor repairs. Every day the house got noisier, dustier, messier, and yet I started to look forward to the sound of his boots coming up the stairs, the clatter of tools, his laugh from the other room when I said something sarcastic. We had coffee once, outside on the porch during his break. He took it black, said cream was for the weak. I told him I liked mine with oat milk. He gave me a look that was half judgment, half amused curiosity. "You're too clean for this place," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "And you're too handsome to be breaking my bathroom walls." It slipped out. I didn't mean to say it. Not like that. But the words were already hanging in the air between us. He didn't flinch. He just held my gaze a second longer than usual. "Maybe I like breaking things," he said, voice low. I couldn't tell if he was talking about drywall or something else entirely. That Friday, I got home late from the office. He was still working, past the time he was supposed to be gone. "Didn't expect you here this late," I said, loosening my tie. He glanced up from where he was kneeling on the bathroom floor, shirt damp with sweat, forearms streaked with dirt. "Wanted to finish the tile layout. You don't strike me as the patient type." He was right, but something about the way he said it made me feel exposed. I watched him in silence, wondering what it would feel like to run my fingers along his jaw, to pull him close, to finally step over the line I'd drawn so carefully. He looked up, met my eyes, and held them. "Want to see the new tile design?" he asked, voice deep and quiet. I nodded, and as I stepped forward, the air between us changed. Something unspoken cracked wide open. He showed me the tile design in silence. Mason had laid out two variations on a plywood board, white porcelain with slate accents in a clean, modern pattern. But I barely registered the colors or the lines. I was too focused on the way he was crouched, muscles flexing as he held the sample steady, the smell of sawdust and soap lingering around him. "What do you think?" he asked, looking up at me. "I think it looks great," I managed, my voice a little lower than usual. He stood slowly, and the small bathroom suddenly felt too small. His chest rose and fell just inches from mine. "You sure?" he asked again, but his tone had shifted. It wasn't really about tile anymore. I swallowed, heat crawling up my neck. "I trust your judgment." His eyes lingered on me for a second longer. Then he smirked slightly and stepped back. The spell broke, but not completely. "All right," he said, tossing a rag over his shoulder. "I'll get it installed tomorrow." He walked past me, and as he did, his hand brushed my lower back. Just a graze, but it was intentional. I felt it. Every nerve in my body felt it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that interaction. The look, the voice, the touch. He wasn't just flirting. At least, it didn't feel like a game. But then again, why would someone like him want someone like me? I was a clean-cut lawyer, buttoned up and logical. I lived by calendars and contracts. He broke down walls and built with his hands. He worked in the sun. He moved with confidence and strength that didn't ask permission to be noticed. And yet, I felt something in the way he looked at me, like he saw me, not the polished version I showed the world, but the restless man underneath, starved for connection and too scared to admit it. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made coffee, checked emails, folded laundry. Mason arrived around 10. He didn't knock anymore, just let himself in with that quiet, grounding energy he carried. "Morning," he called out from the hallway. "Hey," I replied, pretending to focus on my laptop. He got to work upstairs. Power tools buzzed. Hammers thudded. I tried to block it out, but part of me was counting the minutes until he came back down. Around noon, he emerged, wiping sweat from his forehead with his forearm. "Tile's going in clean," he said. "Want to see the progress?" I followed him up the stairs. The moment I stepped into the bathroom, I was stunned. It wasn't finished, far from it, but the vision was coming together. The tile had transformed the space, made it feel new, alive, like something was finally coming into focus. "Wow," I said. You really know what you're doing. He turned to me, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Thanks, he said. But it helps when someone trusts you to take over. There was weight in his words. I met his eyes. That's not something I do often. I know, he said. I can tell. We stood there, unmoving, the tension wrapping around us like humidity. You ever let anyone in? He asked softly. I hesitated. Not really. He nodded like he understood, really understood. People think it's about being tough, he said. But sometimes, you just get used to doing it all alone. I felt something shift inside me, like a quiet door opening. I stepped closer. He didn't move. You've been here every day, I said. And it's not just the bathroom that's changing. His breath caught. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. What's happening between us? I asked, barely above a whisper. He looked at me like he'd been waiting for that question. You tell me, he said. I opened my mouth to speak, but just then his phone rang. Loud, jarring. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and silenced it. I caught a glimpse of the name, Eric. A man's name. He saw me looking. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Hesitation? I'll call him back later, he said, voice flat. Is he your boyfriend? Mason looked at me for a long time. No, he said. Not anymore. But he still calls. And with that, he turned back to the tile, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the ache of something unfinished between us. I told myself not to overthink it. The name on his screen, the way he silenced the call, the flicker in his eyes when I asked the question, but of course, I did. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to focus on work, tapping endlessly at the same email draft, barely getting through a paragraph. Upstairs, Mason continued hammering, cutting, sealing, like nothing had happened. Like the moment between us hadn't cracked something wide open. The silence between us was thicker than drywall dust. That evening, he packed up his tools and came downstairs. I was at the kitchen counter, pretending to read legal notes. I'm heading out, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the page. But then, I felt him pause in the doorway. Like he wanted to say something. Like he was fighting himself. When I finally looked up, he was already walking out. And I hated the way that made me feel. The next morning I found a coffee cup waiting for me on the porch. Hot. Black. No note. Just there. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up and taking a sip. It was strong. Bitter. And exactly how I liked it. He remembered. Later, when he arrived, he greeted me like nothing had happened. I wanted to call him out, ask about Eric, demand something, clarity, truth, anything. But the moment I saw his face, I froze. There was something guarded in his expression, a wall I hadn't seen before. So I didn't push. Not yet. But I watched. I watched him work in the guest bathroom, sleeves rolled up, veins on his forearms prominent as he laid tile with practiced, almost meditative focus. I watched the way his mouth curved slightly when he concentrated. The way he bit his bottom lip when a tile didn't quite align. And I knew. This wasn't just physical anymore. I was falling. That night, it rained. Hard. Thunder shook the windows. The air was heavy and electric. I was in the middle of folding laundry when there was a knock at the door. Mason. His shirt was soaked, hair dripping, boots muddy. The storm knocked my power out, he said, and my truck's stuck on the drive. I was going to text, but my phone's dead. I stepped aside without a word, letting him in. He peeled off his shirt and shoes at the door, like it was his house too. I watched the rain bead on his shoulders, watched the way his chest rose and fell. "You're welcome to stay," I said. He nodded once. "Thanks." I handed him a towel. Our fingers touched, and something passed between us. Hot. Instant. He took it, but didn't move. "I never meant to confuse you," he said, voice low. "About Eric." I held his gaze. "Then don't." He stepped closer, towel hanging from one hand. "I told you. It's over, but I haven't been with anyone since. Not really. I didn't expect this. Neither did I." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the sound of rain beating against the windows. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached up and touched the side of my face. His thumb brushed just under my jaw. "You let me in more than you realize," he whispered. And just like that, I kissed him. Harder this time, my hands on his chest, his on my waist. We stumbled backward, breathing fast, the air between us charged and hungry. He lifted me up, strong, effortless, and set me on the kitchen counter, lips never leaving mine. Clothes peeled away like they didn't matter. Skin against skin, heat against heat. It wasn't just lust. It was something deeper, desperate, like we'd both been holding our breath for weeks. And finally, we could exhale. When we were done, the kitchen was quiet again. The storm had passed. But inside me, everything was still spinning. He kissed my shoulder softly, then whispered, "I don't know what happens after this." I looked at him. Neither did I. But I knew I didn't want it to end. I woke up the next morning with the sound of eggs sizzling and the smell of toast drifting from the kitchen. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But when I walked out in just a t-shirt and boxers and saw Mason, bare-chested, hair messy, humming to himself while flipping eggs in my pan, I knew last night had been real. All of it. The rain, the heat, the way he looked at me like I was something he never thought he could touch but desperately needed to. "Morning," he said without turning, like this was just another day in our lives. I leaned against the doorframe, heart caught somewhere between wonder and fear. "This is new," I said. "I figured it's the least I could do," he replied. "After throwing your counters into chaos," I smirked, walking toward him. "You didn't throw anything. You rebuilt something." He turned to face me, holding out a plate with eggs, toast, and bacon. "You do know I'm better with a hammer than a frying pan, right?" I took the plate. "You're doing just fine." We sat at the kitchen table, quiet, close, warm. He wasn't in a rush to leave, and neither was I. For once, I wasn't thinking 10 steps ahead. I was just there, with him. But even the quietest moments have a time limit. At around 11 a.m., his phone lit up on the counter. Eric. 2 missed calls. I didn't say anything. Mason glanced at it and turned it face down without a word. That silence felt louder than any storm. He noticed the shift in me, leaned forward, and said, "He doesn't matter." But I didn't believe him. Then why is he still calling? "He saw the picture," Mason admitted. I froze. "What picture?" "I posted one of the tile you liked. I didn't realize you were in the reflection of the window behind me." My stomach dropped. "And he noticed?" "He always notices," Mason muttered, "even when he's the one who let go." "Did he let go?" I asked, my voice quieter. Mason looked up at me, eyes heavy. "Yeah, but I don't think he ever expected me to move on." "And have you?" He didn't answer. Not right away. "I want to," he said. That should have comforted me. But it didn't. The next few days were distant. He still came to work, still fixed the tiles, still drank coffee on my porch. But he stopped sleeping over, stopped lingering in the mornings, stopped letting his fingers brush mine when we passed each other in the hallway. He was slipping. And I felt myself hardening again, brick by brick, the walls going back up faster than he could ever tear them down. On Thursday, I found him standing in the master bedroom, staring at the ceiling, tools untouched. I might need a few days off, he said. I swallowed. Eric? He nodded once. I felt something in my chest crack, but I refused to let it show. You should do what you need to do, I said, voice level. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, like he knew this might be the last time he'd stand in that room with me, but he just gathered his things and walked out the door. No kiss, no promise, no goodbye. That night, I stood in the middle of the half-finished bathroom, staring at the tiles he'd laid so carefully. One was crooked, just slightly. I crouched down and ran my fingers over the edge, my breath shaky. He had built beauty here, piece by piece, but he left one flaw, and I hated how much that one tile suddenly looked like me. He didn't text. He didn't call. I told myself I didn't care. But every time the front door creaked or a car slowed on the street outside, my heart jumped. I'd check the time, wondering what he was doing, wondering if he was with Eric, wondering if I'd just imagined all of it, the looks, the silences, the way he'd held me in the dark and kissed my shoulder when he thought I was asleep. I spent that Saturday alone. The tools were still in the garage, the house half renovated, half alive. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat on the floor of the bathroom he left unfinished, and stared at the crooked tile like it might answer something for me. That's where I was when I heard the knock. I didn't move right away. Then came another knock, softer, 3 times. I opened the door, and there he was, Mason, soaked from the rain again, like déjà vu. He looked tired. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled like he'd driven straight here without stopping. I messed up, he said. I didn't respond. He stepped inside slowly, dripping onto my floor, and closed the door behind him. I went to see him, he said, not because I still loved him. I needed to hear myself say it to his face. That it was over. I stared at him. And? I said it, and I meant it. My chest tightened. He said I'd never be happy with someone like you, Mason added. That you're too controlled, too distant, that you'd never let me in. That stung, because it was half true. I turned away. Maybe he's right. No, Mason said, stepping closer. He's not. Because I've seen you let me in the quiet moments, in the way you looked at me that night in the kitchen. I just didn't know how to believe it. I was scared too. I looked up, finally meeting his eyes. So what now? I asked. He stepped forward again, close enough for me to feel his breath. Now, he whispered, I fix the tile, and then I fix us. He reached out, slowly, like I might pull away, but I didn't. I let him touch me again, and this time it wasn't rushed or heated or urgent. It was steady, present, and it felt like something solid, something real. The bathroom got finished the next week. Every tile laid with precision, including the crooked one. He pulled it out and redid the whole row. I couldn't leave it like that, he said. I knew he meant more than just the tile. He started staying over again, but it was different now. No secrets, no unfinished sentences. We talked at night, about fears, about pasts, about who we used to be before we met each other on opposite sides of a wall. One morning, I made coffee for us both. Black, no oat milk, just how he liked it. "You're changing," he said, sipping it with a grin. I looked at him across the counter, the sunlight hitting the curve of his jaw. "Maybe I'm just becoming more myself," I replied. He reached across and took my hand. "You let me in." "You broke the walls," I said. He shook his head. "No, you invited me through the door." That night, we lay in bed with the windows open, the air still and warm. I thought about the first time I saw him. Dusty boots, cocky smile, eyes that made me forget who I was for a second. Now, I knew exactly who I was. And I knew exactly who he was, too. Not just the man who took me to bed, but the man who stayed. The man who helped me rebuild, brick by brick. Not just the house, but everything I'd hidden behind. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of how much I wanted him. Maybe this time I could want and receive. Fully. No hesitation, no silence. Just us.